Recruitment Part 2. For about a century and a half after the time of Murad I, warfare and raiding continued to be a bountiful source of recruits to the Sultan's service. With the establishment, probably during the reign of Bayezid I, 1389–1402, of a body of raiders who received land and tax exemptions in return for an obligation to conduct razzias into enemy territory, raiding became a formalized activity. This ensured a constant flow of captives, even outside periods of formal warfare. The Burgundian, Bertrand de la Broquière, for example, recalls how, in 1432, in the Maritsa Valley in Bulgaria, he encountered about 25 men and 10 women, tied together with heavy chains about their necks. They had recently been captured in the Kingdom of Bosnia during a raid by the Turks, and were being taken to Adrianople by 2 Turks to be sold. The chronicler Ashik Pashazade remembers with relish an incursion over the Danube in 1440, where the raiders were so sated that they were selling exquisite slave girls for the price of a boot and apos. Every war and every successful raid produced its crop of slaves, and on these the Sultan claimed the right to impose the levy. It is difficult, in the absence of records, to establish how effective and how systematic the sultans were in extracting their share of prisoners of war. The reign of Bayezid II, 1481–1512, however, saw an attempt to systematize and codify Ottoman law, and it was no doubt in this context that Bayezid, in 1493, issued a decree to regularize the collection of prisoners for imperial service. The order was in response to a request for guidance from a certain Yusuf, who was the officer responsible for making the levies from the young men captured by the raiders in Roumelia. The decree lays out how the commander of the raid is to be rewarded with 25 of the lads, which he brought in by his own efforts, the officers in charge of the levy with 5 each that they won themselves, the higher-ranking officers with 1 each of those that they won themselves, and the lower-ranking officers of the raiders with 1 between 2 of those that they won themselves. The rest, from the age of 10 to 17, are to be taken by Yusuf. If some of those over the age of 17 show signs of being suitable, they too are to be taken, the owner being paid 300 akshas from the treasury for each lad. The lads must not be crippled or sick, or show signs of reaching puberty, or have begun to grow a beard. To ensure that the captive lads reach the capital, the decree orders both the officer in charge of the levy and the commander of the raid to make a register, which their representatives must bring with the prisoners. This allowed the authorities to check whether any of the lads had gone missing between assembly on the frontier and arrival in the capital. A copy of the same decree exists which substitutes for the formula, I, the Sultan, have commanded. The phrase, the law, is as follows, suggesting that this particular decree to Yusuf acquired the status of a general law regulating the collection of prisoners for the Sultan. Wars and raids into Europe continued to be a source of slaves during the 16th century, but probably not on the same scale as before. Before 1526, the line of the Danube and the Sava formed the boundary between the Ottoman Empire and the Kingdom of Hungary, and raids across the rivers ensured a continuous flow of prisoners. However, after the defeat of the Hungarian king at Mohács, and the establishment on the throne of a king loyal to the Sultan, Hungary ceased to be a raiding ground. In 1541, Central Hungary became an Ottoman province, bordering on the well-fortified Habsburg lands to the west. In these circumstances, the regular, large-scale incursions of the Ottoman raiders were no longer possible. Furthermore, in 1595, the destruction in battle of many thousands of the raiders put an end to their organization in its traditional form. These factors limited the supply of slaves. Writing in the 1640s, the historian Ibrahim Pchevi commented on how the supply of slaves had ceased, which had formerly allowed governors on the frontier to maintain large households and retinues. At some time, the practice of levying a proportion of prisoners for the Sultan must also have stopped. Prisoners, however, continued to come into the empire, especially from Tatar raids into Russia and Poland, from the Caucasus, and from sub-Saharan Africa via Egypt, and the Sultan continued to recruit slaves from these sources. It is clear, nonetheless, that the supply of slaves from outside the empire's borders was insufficient. The sultans therefore established a second and more reliable source of supply. This was the Devshirmor collection, 11, whereby the sultans levied the slaves from among their own Christian subjects. In Islamic law, the practice was illegal, since non-Muslims in the empire had the status of protected infidels, and so could not be enslaved. The question of its legality, however, although a subject of debate in the 16th century, 12 never affected practice, and the collection became the main source of recruitment into imperial service between the 14th and late 16th centuries, and the practice did not disappear entirely until the 18th. It is impossible to establish exactly when the collection began. However, a sermon of 1395 by the Metropolitan of Thessaloniki laments, "What would a man not suffer were he to see a child whom he had begotten and raised, carried off by the hands of foreigners, suddenly and by force, and compelled to change over to alien customs and become a vessel of barbaric garb, speech, impiety and other contaminations?" 13 2 years later, an Italian, Calicchio di Salutati, reported that the Turks seized boys of 10 to 12 years for the army. 14 Both comments seem to refer to the collection, indicating that the institution was in existence by the 1390s. It came into being, therefore, sometime during the 14th century. This was a period when the Turks of Western Anatolia seemed to have had a limited understanding of Islamic law and probably, therefore, only a hazy notion of the statutes of slavery in terms of which later generations were to understand the collection and the status of the Sultan's servants. This may explain the easy acceptance of an institution that was, in Islamic terms, illegal. In 1438, a brother Bartholomew de Llano again referred to the collection in his letter on the barbarity of the Turks and Appas. Here he reports how the Sultan was taking 1 in 10 Christian boys from 10 to 20 years, whom he makes his special slaves and shield bearers, and, what is worse, Saracens and Appas. He spoke of the practice as something which the Sultan never used to do, as though it were something new. This indicates probably that Brother Bartholomew was simply unaware that the collection of youths was a regular event, but possibly that it had ceased during the civil war between 1402 and 1413, and was only now beginning again. 15. In one respect, Brother Bartholomew's account was certainly wrong. It is unlikely that the Sultans ever collected youths at the rate of 1 in 10. The Serb, Konstantin Mihailovich, who served in the Ottoman army between 1453 and 1463, in fact refers to the lads which the Sultan collected in his own realms as chilik, a word which clearly derives from Persian chili yek, 1 in 40, and obviously represents the rate of the levy. This is also the rate which appears in a document from the early 16th century, which served as a template for sultanic decrees ordering the collection of lads for imperial service. The text begins, "I, the Sultan, have ordered that, in the judicial district of comprising X households, and in that of comprising Y households, A and B lads respectively, a total of C be collected at the rate of 1 lad per 40 households." The rate of the collection, therefore, was 1 lad in 40 households. The document continues by laying out the procedure which the collection was to follow. The official in charge was to take with him a janissary officer and go without delay to these judicial districts, to warn the people by proclamation, and, without omitting a single village, to gather all the sons of the infidels and of the notables, together with their fathers, and have them brought before him, and to inspect them personally. If any infidel has several sons, he is to enregister and take and detain a good one for janissary service, of the age of 14 or 15 or, at the most, 17 or 18. But he is not to take the son of a man not having several sons and, after taking one, he is to send the others back to their father, without any injustice. An early 17th century work entitled The Laws of the Janissaries, which offers remedies for current deficiencies in the Janissary Corps by reference to the ideal practices of the past, lays out the principles of selection. The officers in charge should not take the sons of important men, priests, or men of good descent. They should not take only sons, because these help their fathers in farm work, and, if they are not there, the father will not be able to cultivate his land and pay taxes. They should not take orphans, because they are opportunist and undisciplined, boys with a squint, because they are perverse and obstinate, tall lads, because they are stupid, or short lads, because they are troublemakers and Appas. Nor should they take lads who are fresh-faced and beardless, because they appear despicable to the enemy and Appas. It was forbidden, too, to take married men or craftsmen. Men who could earn a living through a craft would not be prepared to endure hardship. There were other categories which the author of the laws excluded. Above all, they should not take Turks. If they were to do so, their relatives would also claim to be slaves of the Sultan and demand tax exemptions, or seek to enter the Janissary Corps. At the same time, governors would think them to be genuine imperial slaves, leading to indiscipline. The Turks, too, the author describes as merciless, and with very little in the way of piety or religion and Appas. Instead, the author continues, the benefit of taking the offspring of infidels is that when they become Muslims, they become zealous for the religion, and enemy to their family and dependents and Appas. This was probably an exaggeration A document of 1572 shows a janissary presenting a petition to the Sultan on behalf of his family in Albania, 16 indicating that he had neither become enemy to them, nor lost contact. Similarly, a case in the Istanbul court register for 1612-13 has an entry which records a case where a governor in Anatolia, clearly a product of the collection, collaborated with his brother, a local priest, in making illegal exactions from the population of his district. 17 These cannot have been isolated cases of continuing contact. Nonetheless, any lad levied through the collection owed his present livelihood, with its regular salary, and his future career to the Sultan and not to his family or kin, and, in this sense, the most vital link with his background was severed.